All right, Javosai, good morning. Let us begin a beautiful daf ahead of us today. Begin by thanking our sponsors, our TALMUD TORAH sponsors for the month of Av, Paul and Kathy Pollack, for dedicating the Sherman Drushos this month in honor of their grandchildren, Tikva Esther, Simcha, Avigayil, Milana and Milicenta. May they grow to become the best version of themselves. The Daf Yomi shir in the schus of refuah shlema for Yehuda Ben Michal. And our week of learning sponsors, Jeff and Karen Cohn, the commemoration of the yahrzeit of Karen's mother, Mrs. Clara Oxman. We hope that in the merit of our TALMUD TORAH, all of the neshamas will have an aliyah, the families in Nechama, and all those who need a refuah should have one together with Kol Cholei Yisrael. With that, let us begin. We have a lot to do today, a beautiful daf ahead of us today. Today's daf is Mem Dalet, 44. And we are picking up in Meretz Hashem on Mem Gimel on the days 43b. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 15 lines up from the bottom. Umigva me'emas. So we'll say, if you remember again, in yesterday's daf, we were speaking about the idea, we were introduced to the Mishnah on Amud Beis, where the Mishnah was talking about essentially the idea about at what point in time does a father remain entitled to collect his daughter's ksuva. So the Mishnah highlighted the machlokes between the Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda. Now, the Mishnah actually, interestingly enough, was set up as dealing with two marriages. The first one from which she was divorced, the second one from which she was widowed. Okay, the Gemara explained why it is that we have that particular setup. But here's what's interesting. What's interesting is the Mishnah seemed to indicate to us that halacha l'maisa, the ksuva obligation is intact in some form already from Erison. That was the takeaway from the Mishnah, which is quite interesting, and the Gemara is going to analyze that a little bit more. So the Gemara asks a question, Mikva me'emas gavia. At what point in time is the ksuva collectible? Now, what does that mean? If you look at Rashi almost right across, so Mikva me'emas gavia, kolomar, le'inyan zechiyah da'av, daha chazilan, dalag basar, Erison azlinon, avil rabbi dikediktani, mod rabbi Yehuda Ben Michal spitu bagra, so Rashi points out over here, we're going to clarify this point as well. Even though from the Mishnah, it sounds like that from Erisin, there may be a ksuva obligation. We know that in fact, halacha l'maisa, the ksuva obligation is really only going to begin from the time that the ksuva is written. Now, I will say, this goes back to something you've already alluded to, and we'll get into greater depth in not a little bit, but later on in this Masechta. When we think about a ksuva, what do we think about? What do you think about? A document called the Kesuvos. Right? You sit down at the chassan's dish, you write the Kesuvos. We're going to see that the concept of Kesuvos, or the obligations of a Kesuvos, could potentially exist even independent of a document. In fact, we're going to see that there were communities that never wrote Kesuvos documents. They never wrote documents. But Lamaisa, the Kesuva obligation still remained intact. We're going to discuss that a little bit. So the Gemara is going to point out over here as follows. What we're really asking, really drilling down to over here is as follows. The power of a Kesuva is that a Kesuva is a debt. Right? The man gets married. What does he owe to his wife? In a nutshell? Everything. Right? Well said. Right? Everything. Right? Everything. So the mice again, in fact, we'll talk about this as well. The power of a ksuva is such that it encumbers everything, even items that the husband will acquire after the marriage, which is unique, only applies to ksuva and nothing else. The other part of the ksuva is because the husband owes everything to his wife, his entire estate is encumbered. So there's a lien against his entire estate in order to satisfy the ksuva. So the Gemara says over here essentially, halacha l'maisa, let's say husband dies, and now wife wants to collect her ksuva. Let's say for argument's sake, over the course of the marriage, the husband sold off every single piece of property. She now has the right to go ahead and extract property from purchasers in order to go ahead and satisfy the ksuva debt. So the shaila is, as Rashi points out over here, le'inyan mitraf l'kuchos me'imas tarfa. From what point in time does she have the ability to extract items sold by the husband? Is it from the time of Erisin? Is it from the time of Nisuin? Is it from the date in the Ksuva? So that's the Shaila. Umikva me'imas gavya. Rafuna. Rafuna says, Mana masai mina Erisin, tausefes mina Nisuin. Very interesting. Rafuna says, the Mana masai, I will say, what does Mana masai represent? Mana masai represents the 100 or 200 or 100, which is the core Ksuva. right? If it's a first marriage, so then that ksuva is worth 200 zuz. If it's a second marriage, that ksuva is worth 100 zuz. So Rav Huna says, Iker ksuva, the primary part of the ksuva, is collectible from erusin. In other words, the lien on the husband's estate for the Iker ksuva is there as of erusin. Tosefes. What's tosefes? Additional amounts. I will say now by Ashkenazim, we don't really do this. By Sfardim, even today, they still do this, where they will write into the ksuva additional amounts. What additional amounts? Whatever you want it to be. Let's say the chassan is fabulously wealthy, and he wants to promise his wife the world, so he can go ahead and write his money. So Rav Huna makes this interesting distinction. The Iker ksuva is collectible as of erusin, and any additional amounts over nisuin, right, by nisuin. So therefore, I will say, when the wife comes to collect the ksuva, where she's coming to collect Iker ksuva, she has a lien against her husband's estate and can go ahead and repossess property from purchasers to satisfy the Iker ksuva as of the date of erusin. Tosefes nisuin. Ravasi said no. Ravasi said no. The date, in other words, when it comes to ksuva, the lien against the husband's estate is only as of nisuin. Only as of nisuin, and that applies to both amounts, Iker ksuva as well as tosefes. Umi amar Rav Huna hachi. Did Rav Huna really say this? So Rav said, hold the interesting case. Hotzia alav shtei ksuvos achal shel masayim achal shel shlosh meos. Watch the following case. Rachel's married to Reuven, and Rachel produces two ksuvas. Ksuva number 1 is worth 200 zuz, and ksuva number 2 is worth 30. Oh, so before we go on, take a look at Rashi. Rashi says, Dehi gufa machla l'shibuda kama v'nisratza bizman ha'kaso b'shtar ha'ksuva kichol ha'mefurash ba ben ikar ben tosefes. Sheva said, I want to point something interesting out over here. When is the ksuva being written? When is it being written? It's being written by Pashtos at the time of Nisuin. That's when it's being written. As I mentioned before, there's a concept, however, that the obligation of ksuva is chal by erusin. So in other words, what you have over here essentially is as follows. You have a lien that is created as of the time of erusin, but a document that is dated as of the time of Nisuin. Just to go back for just a moment, so Rav Asi, so again, Rav Huna therefore says, she could collect Iker Ksuva as of the date of Erusin, and Tosefes as of the date of Nisuin. That's Rav Huna. Rav Asi essentially says, what happens over here is, she forgives, she has the lien as of the time of Erusin, then once she gets that Ksuva with a date in it, she has a document, she is mocheles on that earlier lien. She forgives it. Because now she has a document. A document is solid. A document has a date. A document is a shtar. And therefore she forgives the earlier lien. Because of that, according to Rav Asi, both the Tosefes, the Iker and the Tosefes are collectible as of Nisuin, which is the date written in the Ksuva. Good. So now let's go back there. Did Rav Huna really say this? So itmar hotzia alav shtei ksuvos. A woman produces two ksuvos against her husband. Achal shel masayim v'achal shel shlosh meos. Interesting case. Ksuva number 1 is worth 200 zuz. Ksuva number 2 is worth 300 zuz. So what do we do with this? Rav Huna said, Basa ligbos masayim govim izman mishon. Right? If she wants to go ahead and use the first ksuva, she could collect as of the first date. Shlosh meos gova mizman sheni. If she wants to use the second ksuva, ultimately she could collect from the second date. In other words, we'll say, what does Rav Huna seem to be saying? Rav Huna seems to be indicating to us that halacha l'maisa, she only has one ksuva. In other words, the same Rav Huna who said before that as of the date of Erusin, she has a claim against Iker ksuva, and as a later date, she has a claim against Tosefes. Here Rav Huna is saying if she produces two documents, she could collect one or the other. She can't collect both. Look at Rashi just a moment. She only has the right to collect one of these ksuvos. The yafek kocha ligbos eze shetirza Ba'achas ligbos masayim denechelu ba'achi. Gon shemachar nechasas wosai. The idea over here is, according to Rav Huna, she has the ability to collect one of these two ksuvas. V'im isa, I don't understand. But according to Rav Huna, based on what they said before, Tikbi masayim mizman rishon, umea mizman sheni. In other words, I will say, according to Rav Huna's logic, why should she only be able to collect one ksuva? Right? According to what Rav Huna said before, halacha l'maisa, she should be able to collect what? Either of the two. Because Rav Huna said she collects ikr ksuva when? As of Erusin, tosefes as of Nisuin. So why is it any different than having two ksuvas, one dated date 1 for 200, one dated date 2 for 300? She should be able to collect both. Yet Rav Huna says she can only collect one. To which the Gemara says, Olotamech Tikbi chamesh me'os, right? Kulam ma'asayim mizman rishon, tlas me'em mizman sheni. And again, the logic being she should collect 500. Let her collect both. Ella, listen to this. Chamesh me'os ma'atam elogavia. Abba said, this is fascinating. Why does, according to Rav Huna, why can't she collect 500? Right? Why? As of date number 2, let her just collect a total of 500. Why can't she do that? Kevan de lo kasavla savisi va'osifis lach tlas mea amasayim. So I will say, listen to this. How are these documents written? These documents are not written that I hereby give you a ksuva of 200, right? And now I'm also adding on a ksuva of 300. It doesn't say that. What does it say? How does he write it? It's written as, here's a ksuva of 200, and here is a ksuva of 300. Two independent, unrelated documents. So watch this. So the Gemara says, Halchi Kamarla, Im Izman Rishon Kavias Gvias, Im Izman Rishon Gvias Gavia Masayim, Im Izman Sheni Gvias Gavia Tlasmia. He will say what he's giving her is an either or. An either or. If you want to collect from the earlier date, here's a ksuva of 200. If you want to collect from a later date, here's a ksuva of 300. But I will say, see, here's what's interesting. Just to understand what's happening over here, what is he trying to do? He's trying to incentivize her taking a later lien. See, I will say, it could very well be that he has to transact some business. He wants to go in and sell off some properties. So what he's saying to her is, look, you can take the earlier ksuva that's worth 200 and get an earlier lien, or you could take a later lien. I'll pay you more money, but this way, again, I have unencumbered properties for a longer amount of time. But in no way does he mean to give her 500 zuz. That's not what's happening over here. How do we know that? Because we're going to see in just a moment. When you write two shtaras and they're written in a way where they're both independent, essentially they have no relationship to each other. Right? So that's what's happening over here. So therefore, in this case of Rav Huna, he's telling her this is an either or. I'm incentivizing you to take the later document, but if you want to take the earlier document, you can for a lesser amount. So to over here in this case, the reason why she doesn't collect both, midalo kasavla osifas lacha mea amasayim achule achilta l'shibude kama. So we'll say the same idea over here. That halacha l'maisa, any time that the husband doesn't write, I'm adding on to you. Essentially, what he's saying is, you take your choice of which document you want. But if you want to take the second document, essentially what you're doing is what? Forgiving the lien on the first. So Amar Mar, ibaya b'hai gavya. Now, Bosina, listen to this. Comes along Mar, and Mar is arguing on Rav Huna. Look at Rashi. It's almost right across. It is right across. Amar Mar, Bosina, 3 lines down, Amem Dalad Medalev. Amar Mar, Ad Rav Huna Kai. So Bosina, remember again. So here's where we are right now. We are with a machlokes Rav Huna and Rav Asi. Namely, we're trying to figure out at what point in time is ksuva collectible, right? And specifically, we're trying to figure out is if the husband has no assets and the wife has to seize assets from purchasers in order to satisfy her ksuva, as of what date, transactional date, can she seize property? So Rav Huna makes a distinction between ikr ksuva and tosefes. Ikr as of erusin, tosefes as of nisuin. Rav Asi is saying essentially both as of when? Nisuin, which we'll say for our purposes is also going to be the date in the ksuva. So now comes along Mar, and Mar argues, look at Rashi, Amar Mar, Ad Rav Huna Kai, Da Amar in Basal Ligbos Masayim. So also remember again. So now, Mar is coming to argue on Rav Huna, and he says as follows, Ibaya Bahai Gavya, Ibaya Bahai Gavya. So ultimately, again, if she wants to go out, she could collect from either one. In other words, if she wants to collect the 100 from the Iker Ksuva from Irisin, or the Tosefes from Nisuin, she has the ability to do that. But according to Mar, what is he adding over here? What is he when he says if she wants this one or that one? What is he essentially saying?
She has both,
but not both, right? In other words, here's what's interesting. Rav Huna was saying she has both. There's just a different lien for both, right? In other words, the Iker has a lien as of Erisin, and the Tosefes has a lien as of Nisuin. Mar comes along and says, no, she does not have both. She gets one or the other. So she has a choice. Right? She could collect Iker, or she could collect Tosefes. To which the Gemara says, Lema Pligid Rav Nachman. This seems to argue on Rav Nachman. Why? What does Rav Nachman say? Dam Rav Nachman, I will say, it's so interesting. Shnei shtaros hayotzin b'zeh achar zeh. I will say, what happens in the following case? Right? You produce two documents. Shnei shtaros, right? Two documents, one after the other. What's the halacha? Zeh, so the Gemara says, hayotzin b'zeh achar zeh, bital sheni es harishon. The second one negates the first. The second one negates the first. And as we're both say, so if it appears that you have two duplicative documents, right? So halacha l'maisa, the second one negates the first. Okay, but we're gonna put a little more meat on these bones. Lav mi itmar l'abosai. Did we not explain this? Amar Papa, Omod Rav Nachman, di osif be dikla litosefes kasvei. L'abosai. Now there is a distinction. If the second document adds something that the first one did not have, then halacha l'maisa, they are both valid. They're both valid. So if you have two duplicative documents, the second one is valid, the first one is batal, which makes sense because, in other words, the emergence of the second document essentially says that there's something flawed in the first one. Otherwise, why is the second document being written? There's nothing new transactionally. There just must have been something wrong in that first document. Whatever was wrong, one of the eidim wasn't kosher, whatever the situation was, but the emergence of the second document negates the first. However, if the second document adds something to the first, then halacha l'maisa, they're both valid. So for example, again, his example of being mosif is halacha l'maisa. Let's say, in the first document, Reuven sold Shimon a field. And in the second document, it says Reuven sold Shimon a field and a palm tree. So in that case, where the second document is adding something, the second document will be valid, will be valuable as well, or will be valid as well. Hachanami, I don't understand. In this case, hachanami, ha'osif la midi. See, I will say, at the end of the day, this case, right? Remember what's happening over here. He's also being mosif. Right? What is the husband being mosif? What is it? The Tosefes Ksuva. Because in this case over here, the first shtar, so to speak, or the first hischayvis was the Iker, the second hischayvis was the Tosefes. So let's analyze this. Gufa, Amr Rav Nachman, so Rav Nachman raised the kasha, Shnei shtaros hayotzin b'zeh achar zeh. Two documents come out one after the other. So what's the halacha? So the Gemara said, Bital sheni es harishon. The second one negates the first one. In other words, we both say this is assuming that there are two duplicative documents. So we both say, so remember again, if you have two duplicative documents, what's going to be the only distinction between them? I know that sounds like an oxymoron. Two duplicative documents, what's the difference? The date. And by the way, that's big, right? Why is that big? Because what does date do? What does date do? Date creates the lien, the shibud. So remember again, Abosai. So therefore, Rav Nachman is introducing a very interesting halacha. So you have a case where Reuven produces a document that says that Shimon produces a document that says he purchased a field from Reuven, and he goes ahead and he produces two different documents. One is dated the 22nd of Av, and one is dated the 23rd of Av. They contain the same information. Rav Nachman says The second one is valid. The first one is invalid, which Rabbi say then means that the lien that ultimately again Shimon will have against Ruvain is as of the 23rd of Av. So however, Amar Papa again Umod Rav Nachman the Osif Beidikle Beizama Dikle Litosef Es Kasve. But Rav Nachman will agree that halacha l'maisa, if there's something additional in the second document, then ultimately, again, the second document was not there to replace the lien of the first, but rather was there to add something transactional. And I will say, I'll point out, why do they use the example of a palm tree? Because the sale of one palm tree, it sounds like, would have been insignificant. I know, I'd love to own one palm tree because I don't have any palm trees. But Lamaisa, the Gemara uses that as even like an insignificant addition. In other words, so if you see that there is some type of addition, albeit insignificant, halacha Lamaisa, that will then give validity to what? To both documents. Right? So now I understand the lien is not trying to be replaced, but rather something being added transactionally. So the Gemara says as follows. Right, look at Rashi, by the way. Litosefes kasve, you see Rashi? V'lo levatule kamo. See, I will say, if something is being added by the second document is not coming to replace the first. It's coming to add on to the first. Ela di'i mizman sheni asil migbi. Likne is, I'm sorry, v'lo levatule lekamo. Ela di'i mizman sheni asil migbi. Likne ikar v'tosefes v'hinei chale bekamo. Bishum dekadim lo likne tosefes. Okay, I'm sorry, that's actually going on. That's going on the piece before. To which the Gemara says, so pshita. So we'll say, let's analyze this piece. So let's analyze. So we'll say, I'll just point out in the Ksuva conversation. So the way we would view these two documents through this lens of Rav Nachman, or I should say of Rav Nachman is as follows. Rav Nachman normally says that halacha l'maisa, if you have two documents that are duplicative, the second overrides the first. So let's keep to this. We'll go back to Ksuva in just a bit. So let's analyze. So Pshita, so the Gemara says, Pshita, Rishon Mecher V'Sheni Matana. So let's say the following situation. Very interesting. Here's the case. Ruvain sells a field to Shimon. Okay, they drop a document, all is good. There are two documents that are produced. Document number one is Mecher, is a sale document. Document number two, interestingly enough, is written that says that Reuven gifts the field to Shimon. So document number one is a sale document. Document number two is a gift document. Same field, same information, just first is a sale, second is a gift. So I will say, so now what do we do with that? This is actually quite interesting. So the Gemara says, Pshita Rishon Mecher V'Sheni Matana. That works. Do you know why? What is the second document coming to do? Liyapos kolcho hu dekasavle mishum dina debar metzora. The boss say this is fascinating. It's coming for what purpose? In other words, if Reuven already sold the field to Shimon, why would he also be writing a gift document? Because the boss say gift document is helpful. Why? Because of dina debar metzora. The boss say, listen to this. Dina debar metzora says as follows: when you go ahead and you sell your property, your neighbors have right of first refusal. That's called dina dehalacha de bar metzora. Bar metzora is a neighbor, someone who borders you, which makes sense, right? Because if, again, my neighbors have right to first refusal, they have to pay whatever I'm asking, right? They have right to first refusal because halacha l'maisa, my property represents something unique to my neighbors, which they can't acquire anywhere else. And therefore, Abosai, halacha l'maisa, so let's say, again, Reuven wants to sell to Shimon. Shimon's not a neighbor. So Levi is Reuven's neighbor. So technically speaking, Levi should go ahead and get right of first refusal. However, there's one exception to this rule, which is if Reuven is gifting the property, and we'll say, what's the logic? The logic is, because Levi, Reuven's neighbor, could say to Shimon, go buy a piece of property somewhere else. You don't have to buy this one. This one is not unique to you. This one, Levi says, is unique to me. Because why? It's my neighbor. However, if Reuven is giving the property to Shimon as a gift, that represents something unique to Shimon. right? Because you can't get a gift of property everywhere. And that would override the claim of Levi as a neighbor, as a bar mitzvah. So this is fascinating. So if you want to pull a little shtick, right, legal shtick, what you could do is like this. Write up a sale document, Ruvain to Shimon, and then write up a gift document. I'm giving it to you as a sale, but I'm also giving it to you as a gift. What does the gift document do that the sale document doesn't do? It prevents any of the neighbors from claiming the rights of bar mitzvah. Fascinating. Look at Rashi just a moment. Liafos kocho. Rashi says over here, Liafos kocho kasvei v'inami lo osif bei lo bita las harishon. So you both say in this case, so the first document is where Reuven sold the field to Shimon. The second document is where Reuven is gifting the field to Shimon. Then I will say, has Reuven added anything in document number 2? Has he added anything? No. In other words, Shimon hasn't acquired anything new, but rather what Shimon has done is his rights to the field have been solidified. So here's a good example where halacha l'maisa, document number 2 does not negate document number 1. Both stand. Both stand. V'chol shekain, all the more so the Gemara says, v'chol shekain rishon b'matana v'shein b'mechar. They both say, what if Reuven wrote the first document as a matana? In the first document, he conveys a gift to Shimon, and in the second document, that's a document of sale. Why does that work? Darminan mishum dina de balchov hu de kasef came. See, I will say, in that case, halacha l'maisa. So remember again, if you already gifted it, then why does he sell it? Because I'll say, remember again, if you gift property to someone, Reuven gives property to Shimon, and then Reuven's creditors come and seize the property from Shimon, what recourse does Shimon have? 0. It was a gift. Oh, but if Shimon is a purchaser, then what recourse does he have? Again, he can go back after Reuven for restitution. So therefore I will say, if the first document was a gift document, Reuven gifted property to Shimon, and then he goes in and writes a document of sale, of course that works as well, because that gives Shimon recourse in a situation where creditors seize the property. Look at Rashi Din the Bachov. The Asi Bachov v'tarif lemine kabel alav achrayes. Essentially what's happening over here is by writing a document of sale, Reuven is accepting achrayes, responsibility to make Shimon whole should the property be seized. So the Gemara says, good. So the Gemara says, Ella, ishnei b'mecher, shnei b'matana, bital sheni esarishon. However, if Reuven wrote 2 documents of sale to Shimon, or 2 gift documents to Shimon, in other words, if he wrote the same transaction in 2 different documents, then what? Then we say, halacha l'maisa, the second document negates the first. My taima, what's the reason? Rafram Amar, Amar Oduye Odile. So Rafram says it's because halacha l'maisa osay. So again, let's just analyze what we have over for just a second. So this is the sheet of Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman essentially says if you have 2 duplicative documents, what's the halacha? Second one stands, first one is batal. However, if they're not duplicative, let's say the first one was a sale, second one was a gift, they're both valid. Why? Because the second one adds, in other words, second one adds something. Or if the first one was a gift, second was a sale, second one adds something. Essentially, Rav Nachman's shita is, whenever the second document adds something transactional, then both documents stand. Now the Gemara goes back. Okay, so why is it, when they're both duplicative documents, that halacha l'maisa, the second one is batal? Why is that? So it says, well, listen to this. So Rav from Amar, aduye odile. Look at Rashi. What does that mean? Aduye odile. Rashi says, Bala shtar sharisha mezuyef haya v'nisrasa ala achar ligbos nizan sheni. I will say, because if you wrote a document, Reuven sold the field to Shimon, he wrote a document, and then they write another duplicative document, where Reuven essentially is saying is, there's something wrong in the first time. It was forged, the edim are not kosher, whatever it is. The only reason to write a second duplicative document is because there was something fundamentally wrong with the first. That's Rafram. Ravacha Amar Emer Achule Achle L'Shibude. Second possibility is that for some reason, the shibud in the first document was forgiven. Whatever the Metzias is. So my ben Abba, what's the nafkamina between them? Ika benayu aruye sahadi. Right, so the nafkamina would be whether or not the witnesses who signed on the first document are considered to be invalid witnesses. According to Rafram, they are. According to Rav Acha, they're not. Second possibility, the Shalume Piri. Let's say again, the first document says that Reuben sold the field to Shimon. So now Shimon consumed produce between transaction 1 and transaction 2. Does he have to repay that produce consumed? That's an nafkamina. Or the Taska. We'll say last nafkamina would be who has paid property taxes. Right? Who has to pay the property taxes in between document number 1 and document number 2. So my habi Allah. Rabbi say, let's get back to basics over here. Remember again, Rabbi say, how do we get, as interesting as this is, and Rabbi say, now you begin to see why Kesuvos, again, is called Shas Katan, because everything is in here. But let's get back to our regularly scheduled program, right? In other words, what is it that we're trying to figure out over here? We're all about Kesuvos. We're all Kesuvos all the time. In other words, we'll say, Salach Alamaisa, I have 2 questions going on over here. Number one, when is Kesuva collectible as of? Right? That's really what we're about. We have Machlokes Rav Huna and Rav Asi. Rav Huna said Iker Kesuva is from the time of Erusin. Tosefes is from Nisuin. Rav Asi said everything is collectible only from Nisuin. What is the halacha? This is very. Forget about 2 documents. Reuben and Shimon is selling fields. Kesuva, Rabbi says, my simba chol yom. When is Kesuva collectible as of? To which the Gemara says, my habi Allah the Kesuvasa. So Tashad Rav Yehuda Mishmua Mishra Loz Rabbi Shimon, Mana Masayim and Eresin, Vitosefes Min Anisuin. So you have again Rabbi Yehuda, the same name Mishmua, the name of Rabbi Loz Rabbi Shimon. So again, Mana Masayim, the Iker Kesuva is collectible as of Eresin. Tosefes from Nisuin. Vecham the Chum say no, Echad Zeh v'Echad Zeh Min Anisuin. Both Tosefes and Iker from Nisuin, and the Gemara says, Hilchasa, what's the halacha? Echad Zeh, the Echad Zeh Min Hanisuin. There was some, how do we pass the halacha? The Gemara says, both the Iker and the Tosefes is collectible as of the time of Nisuin. And I will say, this is indeed how the Rambam paskins as well. The Rambam in Hilchos Ishus, Perek Yud Halacha Yud Aleph says as follows. The Rambam will say, there is an interesting caveat is, listen to this. Here's how the Rambam writes the halacha. Hama'aris es ha'isha v'kasav la ksuva. If a man does irisin and writes a ksuva for his wife, ultimately, again, the first thing the Rambam says is that the writing of a ksuva does not affect nisuin. However, v'meis al girsha gove eker ksuvas nechorin ve'eno gove tosefes klal hovelo kansa. So therefore, if he dies in Erusin and they never do Nisuin, Halach L'maisa, she could collect Iker Ksuva. She could collect the primary amount if it's first marriage, 200, second marriage, 100. That's the halacha. However, the Rambam says if a man does Erusin but did not write a Ksuva and then he dies, Halach L'maisa, she has nothing. So the first thing I will say that Rambam is teaching us is that Erusin by itself does not generate a Ksuva obligation. If a husband obligates himself to a Ksuva, okay, you can obligate yourself to whatever you want. But Lamaisa, Erusin by itself does not generate a Ksuva obligation. Right? However, again, I both say, Halacha Lamaisa, Shlo Tiknu La Iker Ksuva, Ad Shetinase, or Ad Sheyichtov. So again, if a man does not proactively obligate himself to Ksuva, when does the Ksuva obligation kick in? Both for Iker as well as whatever Tosefes you want to promise. When does that kick in? Nisuin. So we'll say that's how he passes. In Salach Lamaisa, you can obligate yourself from Erusin, but let's assume we're not talking about when does Ksuva become an enforceable obligation from the wife to the husband. Halach Lamaisa, as the Gemara says, the Rambam says, as of Nisuin. Both for Iker as well as Tosefes, unless, of course, the husband writes otherwise. Again, remember again, you can obligate yourself to another person for whatever you want, but assuming you have not, of your own volition, obligated yourself as of Nisun, as when you're obligated in Ksuva. Incredible. Says the Mishnah. So I'll say, interesting case here. Hagiores shenis gaira bita ima. If you have a woman who converted along with her daughter, vizinsa, and the daughter was mizana. They're both saying, now, this is the case of Na'ara Hamurasa, a girl, a Nara, who has Erusin, who engages in adultery. So Rabbi says, so the halacha is this girl ultimately again is killed by skila. A specific halacha case of Na'ara Hamurasa. So Rabbi says, so now listen to this. So here is a girl who converted along with her mother. The girl, converted, and now she had Erisin, and now she was Mizana. What's the halacha? Harei zu b'chenek. Ultimately, and she's not killed with skila, like a regular nara murasa, but rather she's killed with chenek. Now, the reason for that is we're going to see because she is a gioris. She's a girl. She's a convert. Look at Rashi. Harezu b'chenek v'afilu niskara pechusim bas gimel shanim b'cheskas b'sulihi v'chiksiva skila b'nara murasa b'isok siva d'chsev kiyasa nevala b'Yisrael. Says we're going to see the halacha of nara ha'meurasa, which is a specific case in the Torah of a nara who is a basula, who has erisin, who committed adultery, is a din in a girl who is born Jewish, right? Not a gioris. So therefore, again, if the girl is a giores, is a nara, a basula, and has erisin, that's called adultery. So she's killed with chanek, not with skila. So the Gemara said, furthermore, ein la v'zin tzarizu b'chenek, ein la lo pesach v'esav. Further, we're going to see that the halacha is by the nara mu'rasa. She is stoned by the entranceway of her father's home. So this girl, in this case over here, right, is not stoned by her father's home. She's a giores, so she doesn't have a halachic father, right? V'lo me'asela. And again, if it turns out, Rabbi said that the husband lied about this whole thing, she didn't commit adultery, her father doesn't get the 100 sela payment. So essentially what this is saying is, just to outline this a bit. So we'll say, there is a case in the Torah of Na'ara HaMe'urasa Shazinsa. So this is a girl who is a Na'ara, 12 and a half, a Basula, and a Jewish girl who has Erisin. She commits adultery with another man. The Torah says, what's the halacha? She is stoned at the entranceway of her father's home. That's the halacha. So by the way, and if it turns out that her husband lied about her, that she didn't commit adultery, then the husband has to pay the father a fine of 100 ma. Right? So I will say again, of 100 sela. So the first case in the Mishnah is a girl is a giores. So a girl is a giores who is a nara, who is betrothed, ultimately has committed adultery. If she did commit adultery, she's killed with chenek and not with any of these other items. Fine. Let's say she was conceived before her mother converted. But then by the time then her mother converted during pregnancy. So this girl is born to a Jewish mother. What's the halacha? Harezu b'skila. Then Abba say halacha l'maisa. She is then when this girl is born, she's a regular Jewish girl. Because she's a regular Jewish girl, therefore what? She is subject to the regular halacha of na'ara ha'me'urasa. So indeed, if she's a na'ara who is a basula, who is me'urasas and commits adultery, she is killed with skila. Ve'ela lo pesach v'lo me'asela. Now in this case, she's not going to be stoned by the entrance of her father's home. Why not? Because she doesn't have a halachic father. And ultimately, again, if it turns out that the husband is lying, he doesn't pay the 100 sela, because once again, there's no halachic father. If she was conceived by a Jewish mother, right, and birthed by a Jewish mother, then ultimately she's just a regular Jew. And therefore, halacha l'maisa, she's like a Bas Yisrael in all aspects. Therefore, yesh la'av ve'en la'pesach, ve'sav. Let's say she has a father, but her father doesn't have a house. Or yesh la'pesach ve'sav ve'en la'av, or there's a house, but her father died. Harezu b'skila. Ultimately, again, the punishment of Nara HaMuras will still apply to her. Lo ne'amar pesach be'sa'ab ela mitzvah. Because we'll say the idea of stoning her by the entrance of her father's home was only said, quote unquote, for the mitzvah. How to fulfill the death sentence, the chatchila, but is not ma'ake. So therefore, I will say what we are introduced to over here in this Mishnah is the following halacha. The Na'ara HaMe'urasa is a girl who is a Na'ara, who is a Besula, who is now in a state of Erisin, and is accused of committing adultery. So if indeed she has committed adultery, there is a unique halacha that says she is stoned by the entranceway of her father's home. Why is this unique? Because normally adultery is punishable by chenek, by strangulation, and not by stoning. This is different. What we're introduced to at the end of the Mishnah is, if she doesn't have a father, her father doesn't have a home, those pieces are not ma'akev. However, what the Mishnah does introduce us to is that in order for this to occur, this has to be a girl who is born Jewish. it would not apply to a girl who is a Giores. Good. Amud Beis. So we'll say, let's analyze. So we'll say, how do I know this? How do I know this? Now, specifically what the Gemara is asking over here, if you look at the Tab Rashi, Sharasa Shalo Bikdusha, V'leidasa Bikdusha B'skila. How do I know that a case where halacha l'maisa, she was conceived while her mother was not Jewish, but by the time her mother gave birth to her, the mother was Jewish? How do I know that halacha l'maisa, the din of na'araha me'urasa, as we pointed out in Mishnah, still applies to her? Umeisa. From the word of say, umeisa is written in an elongated form. Right? It could have just said, Rashi says over here, umeisa, v'saklua kol anshe ira ba'avanim, umeisa, hi umeisa krayiseri. So I will say, the Torah says that all of the townspeople will stone her, umeisa, and she'll die. I mean, yeah, that's the point. In other words, kind of after you write that the entire town stones her, it's pretty indicative that she's going to die. The umeisa is unnecessary. What does umeisa come to teach us? Umeisa, the rabbos harasa shalo bikdusha v'leidasa bikdusha. So what's like umeisa is coming to include an additional case. What's the additional case? Of a girl who was conceived by a non-Jewish mother, but ultimately again who was born to a Jewish mother. Ihachi, if that's the case, milka nami milki umea sela nami l'shali. If that's the case, then ultimately if the husband is lying, he should be subject to malchus and have to pay the 100 sela. Amar Kra, the pasuk says, umesa lemisa nisraba v'lo leknas. Very interesting. Apparently, this particular girl who was conceived by a non-Jewish mother and birthed to a Jewish mother, for the death penalty, that she's included. But for the other pieces, she is not. The Imel Rabos, Horasa B'leidasa B'kedusha, say comes to include the case of a girl who was conceived by a Jewish mother and birthed to a Jewish mother. Well, if you're conceived by a Jewish mother and birthed by a Jewish mother, you're what? You're just a regular Jew. Right? Hahu Yisraelis Ma'al Yosehi. That's just a regular Jewish woman. The Imel Rabos, Horasa B'leidasa Shalo B'kedusha. Maybe it comes to include a girl who is conceived and birthed to a non-Jewish mother and then converts. Imkain b'Yisrael my ahanila. See, the operative phrase over here that's happening is that halacha l'maisa, the Torah phrases this process as happening b'Yisrael. Now, why does the Torah have to say that this procedure is unfolding b'Yisrael? That's obvious. This is the Torah. It's the halacha that's given to Klal Yisrael. So b'Yisrael, the Gemara is understanding to mean that halacha l'maisa, that halacha, you know what, I forgot to do the Rambam. Okay, I forget to it. Fine. So b'Yisrael comes to teach you that halacha l'maisa only applies to a girl who was born Jewish. B'Yisrael means she's born Jewish. If she converts, this process does not apply to her. I will say now, again, I want to be clear. When we say the process doesn't apply to her, so remember again, adultery is adultery if you're Jewish. The difference over here is the case of Nara HaMe'urasa is a very specific case of a man who has erisin to a Nara who is a Basula. He's claiming she committed adultery. If he's right, she experiences skila, which is unique thing number one, because normally adultery is punished by chanek, strangulation, so she gets skila. And where is she stoned? By the entranceway of her father's home. So I will say, so the Gemara is just saying, to this unique halacha, B'Yisrael teaches me, it only applies to a girl who's born Jewish, not to a Gioris. So it's interesting. Amar B'Yosir Achanino, Hamoti Shemra Ali Yisoma Potter. Was what the following case. Let's say a man goes ahead and is Moti Shema. So both say, so he's married to this girl, or he gets married to this girl, and he claims that she is not a basula. This is the case of Moti Shema. A man gets married, get married, first time she's not a basula. Now both say, let's say he's making this claim against a Yisoma, and it turns out that he's lying. So both say, generally, what's the halacha when you make a claim, when you're Moti Shema? Ultimately, again, generally, the halacha is you have to pay a fee, a fine, to the father. You're never allowed to divorce the wife. So in this case, he's pater. Why? Shne'emar v'nasnu la'avi hana'ara. Because the pasuk says, v'nasnu la'avi hana'ara. Generally, again, the penalty is 100 kesef. You have to pay to the father. But over here, what? Over here, there's no father. Prat l'zu she'ein la'av. Masiv Rabbi Yossi bar Avin, Vitin Rabbi Yossi bar Zvida. So Rabbi Yossi bar Avin, Rabbi Yossi bar Zvida raised the kasha. V'ima'in yima'in aviha. So we'll say, so remember again, this is all the same. So the pasuk over here says, V'ima'in yima'in aviha l'sita lo kesef yishkol kimor habasulos. So I will say, so this is the case of onis and mefata, right? So let's say again, going back a little bit to our previous sugyas of seduction or violation. Let's say the father does not want his daughter to marry this guy. So if the father refuses, l'rabos yisoma liknas. I will say this comes to go ahead and include the yisoma for knas. I will say now, what does this mean? What does this mean? So Rabbi Yosef Lili. So we'll say, so interestingly enough, Rabbi Yosef Lili says, ve'ima'in yima'in aviha. What does he learn from this? See, Rabbi Yosef, when you look at this pasuk, you would assume the only time you get the knas is when there's a father, right? Because the pasuk says if the father doesn't want to marry the girl off to this guy, then he gets the knas. So it sounds like it's only if the father does. If there's no father, there's no knas. No, the double lashon of ma'in yima'in tells us whoever refuses. If it's the father who refuses, or even if it's the girl who, let's say there's no father, and the girl herself refuses, halacha l'maisa, she gets the knas. What do you see from here? That even when there is no father, there is still a knas to be paid. To which the Gemara says, "Hu mosif la v'hu mefarek la v'ba'ala v'achar kach nisyasma." Could be the case, or it could be that halacha l'maisa, that the case of violation or the case of seduction occurred when there was a father alive, and the father died subsequently. So therefore, maybe that case is not a good raya. Now, I will just point out over here that, actually, we'll see the halacha in a bit. Oh, we don't really have a bit, but okay, let's do one more line. I'll tell you halacha. Rava says, chayiv. Rava says, not true. If you're motzi shemra on a yisoma, so we'll say, so remember again, this is the case of a man who's married to a yisoma. He's claiming that she's not a basula. It turns out that he lied. And therefore the Torah says, if you lie about such a thing, you owe a fine of 100 selah. So Rava says, even if there is no father, you're still obligated to pay the fine. Mimai, meditani ami. Ami said, Besulas Yisrael, velo besulas gerim. Ultimately, I will say, because what was the drasha? The drasha was Besulas Yisrael, velo besulas gerim. Now take a look at Rashi. Now I will say, and here's what's interesting. The fact that you exclude besulas gerim. Now watch this. So I will say, if you say that the equivalent case of Yisrael is chayiv, now I will say, every single giores is effectively what? It's interesting. Is effectively what? A yisoma. Right? Why? Because she has no halachic father. So if you say the parallel case by Yisrael is chayiv, that's why I need a pasuk ultimately to exclude gerim. But if you say that a yisoma who's a Yisraelis is ptura, hashta bi Yisrael pater begerim ibai, then I will say if you're going to be pater in a case of Yisrael, it goes without saying in a case of gerim you'll be pater as well. Or as I will say, so therefore Allah Lamaisa, Rava says it must be that in a case of motzi shemra on a yisoma that you are going to be chayiv. And I will say that is indeed, I'll just point out because there begins a new sugya, that is indeed halacha l'maisa how the Rambam paskins. In Hilchos Na'ra B'Sula, halacha gimel, parakim halacha alf, listen to this. Hamotzi shemra bas yisrael v'nimsa davar sheker. We'll say if you go ahead and a man gets married to a woman, he claims that she's not a basula, that's called motzi shemra, and it turns out that he's lying. What's the halacha? Loge, right? He goes in, first he gets malchus, now he needs to get malchus, v'nosim la'avia mishka me'aslam kesav mezukah. And he has to pay the father, halacha l'maisa 100 me'asela. So we'll say, what if she's a yisoma? Watch this. V'im haise yisoma, harehim shalatzma. The Rambam paskins halacha l'maisa. If she's a yisoma, you still have to pay. Who gets the money? Ultimately, again, she gets the money. Halacha l'maisa. Everybody say, we'll stop over here for today. Shkoyach. Packed day. Baruch Hashem. All right, Chevra on Zoom. Shkoyach, everyone. Good Shabbos.